Good evening, everyone. Tonight's Dharma talk is about the general topic of time, and time specifically in Buddhism and spiritual practice is something that is very interesting and also very important. In part, this talk has been borrowed from, or you might say plagiarized from Norman Fisher's, that's Fischer, who's a Zen teacher who's been around and practicing since the 1970s. And he started writing and talking on the topic of time back first that I know of in 2009 in a tricycle article entitled "For the Time Being." And he then followed and continued doing subsequent talks and writings up until two 2016 retreats that he gave at Spirit Rock when he continued to go deeper into this topic and explain it. In those later talks, he went on to quote quite a bit from Suzuki Roshi, Suzuki Roshi's son, and other famous teachers about the topic. And the 2009 article in Tricycle was a little bit, I guess, of a kind of an explanation or kind of filling out of some of Dogen's teachings on the topic of time. And specifically the 2009 talk, he went into details about essentially the crash and Great Recession that happened in 2008. And so in that context, he went into some details or explanation about how time is important in specifically Zen and generally in Buddhism and in spiritual practice. Now, for my own sake, there's a few reasons why time is important in Buddhism. First of all, while you're doing meditation, you have the opportunity to watch time or to observe time and actually to experience time as a human being, using your senses, using your cognitive abilities. You actually experience kind of the tick-tock of time as it passes. And of course, Norman Fischer, along with some other great thinkers and scientists, believe that in fact time does not exist. And interestingly, in these 2016 talks that he gave at Spirit Rock, and then earlier, I believe in 2015, possibly 13 and 14, he also gave talks on the topic of time at Apaya, which is also another Zen practice site, and I believe Green Gulch in California, and another couple monasteries slash retreat centers slash Zen practitioner sites in New Mexico, and in California. So in those later talks, interestingly enough, and these are available if you search time and Norman Fischer on YouTube, he lists a whole long list of idioms and sayings and whatnot in the English language in regards to time, and they included wasting time, for the time being, all the time in the world, time is of the essence, you have nothing but time, killing time, and then he goes on to explain how really from a Zen perspective how utterly ridiculous these these sayings are, because in that philosophy, and when you get into it, time doesn't really exist, because time is actually just kind of a human created concept according to him. So firstly, as I said, time is important in Buddhism because you're observing it, watching it pass. And also time is important because of kind of the metaphysics of experiencing a spiritual practice, because it gives you real insight and real awareness of what's going on, I guess, for lack of a better word. But that spiritual practice gives you kind of a deeper insight into reality. And one of the big components of reality, at least on Earth, and probably throughout all of space, and again that word time, is time itself. So the time-space continuum is something that, for great thinkers and people who are spiritually inclined, you, they really have to kind of come to grips with this understanding of this time-space continuum. So if you look at some of the great religious traditions and shamanism and Native American traditions, things like that, really there's kind of a timelessness to those cultures, and so they've kind of already tapped into this concept of time is cyclical. Time is both going on all the time, and is also kind of standing still. And so for Buddhism, conceptualizing and understanding this concept of time is kind of very important. And the other minister here at the Buddhist church in Jefferson City, Monty, he has often talked about the topic of time, and for him, in fact, he believes that it does not exist. And so that is one of the main reasons that I bring up this topic of time, is that Norman Fisher, along with Monty, kind of take this, what is a Mahayana concept, that basically time does not exist. So taking the Heart Sutra, they kind of expound on that and say that basically the whole point of the Heart Sutra is that really nothing exists. So your entire human experience is just kind of a dream. It's just kind of created in your own mind. You're kind of faking yourself out, as it were. And so in that particular tradition, Zen being a sect of Mahayana, basically believe that time does not exist. And I certainly am here to say that, as Buddhist practitioners, coming to either believe in time or have some concept of time is something that you really have to come up with on your own, and come to terms with as a spiritual person. You have to come and make sense of time sooner or later. So there are examples in popular culture dealing with this topic of time. The one is a teleplay that featured Dustin Hoffman, The Star Wagon, which I believe was probably a 1950s era play that was filmed. And then also recently, Hague, or Haig, H-A-I-G, wrote a book, How to Stop Time, where he has this fictional tale that deals with an individual main character has lived for at least 400 years, and through that time he kind of comes to grip with the constant passing, or if you believe in it, the constant lack of passing of time. So for me personally, um, I do believe in the passing of time, and so I do take a kind of a practical approach towards time. One philosophy um, about the study of time, which is ontology, is eternalism, and that basically believes that only the past and the present exist, but the future does not. Um, and I personally have been involved in a lot of agriculture, growing things, building things, maintaining buildings, things like that. And through that experience, I know that it takes a certain amount of quote unquote time, again I use the term, for a seed to sprout. It takes time to grow that plant. It all has a season, and it all has a lifespan, typically, most plants. But again, that plant is sort of on its own time. It doesn't always sprout exactly according to schedule, as it were. It doesn't sprout in the seed packet says maybe 4 to 7 days. I've often noticed that doesn't exactly happen according to that, and it's supposed to then produce fruits, for example, at a certain amount of weeks, and then it's supposed to die in a certain amount of weeks. Over time, I've noticed that, in fact, a lot of crops don't exactly follow those prescribed or predicted or found schedules. So they do, in their own way, have a kind of a timelessness, even though observing day by day, week by week, in fact, change happens. Now, is that just change happening, or is that related to something we call time? That's something that we have to examine further. But as a meditation practitioner, you notice that the present moment flows on constantly. And as Norman Fisher mentions in these Spirit Rock talks, he says that you try to grab onto this moment, you try to grab onto the second, but in fact you can't, because as soon as you conceptualize this moment, it's gone. And so in that way it kind of confirms the theory that time doesn't exist. It's all figment of your imagination. Another major point that Norman Fisher makes in these talks is that we don't live in the here and now, and particularly in, I believe, the first of the 2016 talks entitled Time. There's part one and there's part two, and particularly he kind of develops from the first mention of it in 2009 as in a result of the Great Recession. By 2016 he has kind of expounded or elaborated on this concept of how do we use time in our spiritual practice, and that basically most people do not live in the now. They in fact live somewhere in the future in a fantasy world that they have created, and this causes a lot of suffering. Now this of course can be con contrasted with another of my great teachers, Dr. Wayne Dyer, who was very much into, as he titled it, the power of now. And so basically all we have is now, which contrasts with Fisher's idea that in fact we don't have now. So these two concepts are sort of related, but at the same time are kind of getting at a very important point, is that all of us as meditators and spiritual practitioners have to kind of deal with this idea of time, and does it exist, what is it, and how does it affect our spiritual practice. Because when you start getting into the concept of time, it really has very profound and meaningful implications for your spiritual and philosophical progress. So time is important in Buddhism because you get to see it passing before your very eyes, but at the same time there is a timelessness and a constantness that you notice. So why do we need time? In Buddhist terms, we don't need it. Because in fact, if you're practicing well, there is a constant timelessness to every second. If you're living in the moment, living now, you notice that time doesn't really matter. You could be 10, you could be 100 years old, but as long as you're practicing faithfully, time is completely irrelevant. It's really your practice and your insight and your spiritual progression that matters, not the ticking of time, the weeks, the months, the years passing. We are always here. There's nowhere to go. There's no one to be in our spiritual practice. And so another great story that Fisher mentions is the story of Phantom City, which I think again is a part of the mainstream Mahayana teaching, and that the Buddha was traveling with a number of his followers, and they go to this city where everything is nice. They have food, lodging, they're practicing very well, they're progressing, and one of the practitioners comes to him and says, "Hey, this is great. This is a wonderful destination." But then the Buddha says to him, the city is actually a fake city. It's a phantom city. It doesn't exist. And in fact, we have to travel further to find our real destination. And only there will we find what we need. And so, the phantom city is a parable of sorts of our own reality here on earth, and that even those who have found incredible insight, who have practiced extremely well, who have even become enlightened in this lifetime, still there's work to be done. And so, in that way, the parable kind of explains that in fact we have to continue going further. A really great quote from these talks by Norman Fisher again is from Suzuki Roshi's son, who I was trying to find what his actual name is, but I couldn't, I was unable to find what Suzuki Roshi's son. Otherwise, I would tell you what that is. But a great quote from him is, "When I lose my life to death, will I be more myself?" And so the concept is really, again, borrowing on this phantom city, that life here on Earth is kind of a fantasy. It's not really real. All that is that, in fact, this body that you take on is not the real you, which certainly is, for those who practice not just Buddhism, but many of the world's religions. That's a part of their teaching, that you are not your body, which is extremely important. And then relating it back to Phantom City, um, the Buddha taught that what we're dealing with in the corporal realm here is in fact not real, and that there's an existence which is beyond here on Earth and beyond our limited bodies. Another great quote from Norman Fisher in these talks is, when you are you, Zen becomes Zen." And that was Suzuki Roshi. So again, Zen, is very, very pointed and very focused, I think, in regards to meditation. Very, very skillful meditators who really notice the coming and the going of the mind, and in this case, the coming and going of time. And so, really, Zen, and for me, spiritual practice is not something that's off far away. It's not something that you just do at the temple. It's right here. And so only when you are really being yourself can you really get into your spiritual practice and make progress. I think it's it's an incredible and profound concept, and yet very simple, which is really what one of the real key benefits, I think, of going to Zen centers is this really honed down, simplistic, and extremely laser focused ability they have with meditation. And so going further into the concept of time, Newton said that there was an absolute time which was free of a perceiver, which is, me personally, the kind of time that I think I personally believe in, is that there is an absolute time, which is kind of the time that I think the universe of the plants that I was talking about growing earlier, they're on this kind of absolute time. The planets and the solar system and the universe and physical matter is all in kind of this absolute time that kind of functions on its own and requires certain lengths of this time which cannot be perceived in order for these natural chemical processes and physical transformations to occur. And so, according to quantum mechanics, there was a beginning of time, which was the Big Bang. But I think, personally, that probably time, like space, is something that probably is infinite and unlimited, both time and space are kind of unable to be limited. And so that really, I think, kind of gets into Norman Fisher's Zen concept of time, that all of this, you're just kidding yourself when you're thinking about wasting time. How can you waste a time, waste something that's infinite? So yeah, I think as we do the second session of meditation, I think those are all great concepts to get into. Thank you.